In the heart of Charleston, South Carolina, stood the old stone church of St. Augustine's Chapel, a place filled with warmth and history. The soft hum of string music echoed through the hall, where white hydrangeas and delicate satin ribbons draped over every pew. It was supposed to be a perfect day. Naomi Brooks stood alone in the bridal suite, gazing at herself in the large vintage mirror. Her mother's veil, worn decades earlier, delicately framed her face. Naomi's hands trembled as she adjusted the tiny pearls stitched along the edges. "I can't believe Ethan wanted the wedding here," she thought, glancing out the window. Beyond the glass, guests in elegant suits and flowing gowns gathered beneath the towering stained glass windows. Ethan's parents had married here 35 years ago, and he insisted they honor the family tradition. Her dress hugged her frame flawlessly, a mermaid silhouette with intricate lace Naomi had spent months picking out. She was a perfectionist, curating every aspect of this day. As the head of Charleston's Museum of Fine Arts, Naomi had poured all her skills into ensuring the wedding was flawless. 15 minutes to go," said her best friend Clara, peeking into the room with a wide smile. "Is Ethan here yet?" Naomi's stomach tightened. Ethan, her fiancé of 2 years, hadn't responded to any of her messages since last night. Maybe he's just nervous. Clara's voice was light, but her eyes betrayed concern. Naomi forced a nod, hoping to believe her. The bouquet, soft white peonies and pale pink roses, sat nearby on the table. Its petals had started to wilt. Naomi frowned. The priest had already sent 3 messages inquiring about Ethan's whereabouts. Then, the door creaked open, and Lucas Shaw stepped inside. His presence filled the room instantly. Broad-shouldered and composed, Lucas was nothing like his impulsive younger brother. As CEO of Shaw Industries, Lucas commanded respect without saying much. Naomi met his eyes and knew. "Ethan's not coming." His voice was quiet, but the words thundered through the room. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Lucas extended a small white envelope toward Naomi. Her fingers shook as she opened it. The note was brief, just 6 words. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Naomi's heart splintered. Her knees threatened to give way, but Clara caught her, whispering soft reassurances. Lucas lingered, silent but visibly tense. "I'll handle everything," he said, his voice steady. "Clara, stay with her. I'll speak to the guests." Through the window, Naomi watched Lucas step onto the church steps. In his crisp black suit, he exuded confidence. Guests gasped as he addressed them, some confused, others sympathetic. Naomi saw their glances toward the bridal suite, felt their pity. She pressed her palms to the edge of the vanity, grounding herself against the nausea creeping in. Lucas returned after the crowd began to disperse. Naomi sat quietly in the corner, her dress pooling around her feet like a heavy cloud. "The guests are leaving," he said softly. "I've canceled the reception and the caterers." "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Lucas's gaze softened. "I'm not leaving you here alone. Let me drive you home." Naomi looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the letter. His calmness steadied her unraveling heart. "Okay," she murmured, accepting his outstretched hand. They left together, stepping out into the fading sunlight. Charleston's skyline turned gold as Lucas's sleek black car wound through the city streets. Naomi watched her reflection in the glass, a bride without a wedding. "Do you want me to take you back to your apartment?" Lucas asked quietly. Naomi shook her head. "I can't go there. It's decorated for the honeymoon." Her voice cracked. "You'll stay at my place," Lucas said without hesitation. "There's a guest room. You need rest." Naomi didn't argue. Lucas's house, nestled in the upscale Magnolia district, was breathtaking. A Victorian mansion with ivy curling along the wrought iron gate. Inside, it was surprisingly modern, elegant yet minimal, with art pieces she hadn't expected from someone so serious. "Prepare the rose room for Miss Brooks," Lucas instructed his housekeeper, Evelyn, as they entered. Evelyn, a warm older woman, nodded kindly and disappeared upstairs. "I'll bring you something to wear," she offered. The guest room was cozy, bathed in soft blues and creams. Naomi sank to the floor, wedding dress still clinging to her like an old memory she couldn't shed. Tears finally broke free. A soft knock at the door startled her. Lucas stepped inside, holding a glass of red wine. "I thought you might need this." Naomi's eyes were swollen as she accepted it, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Lucas loosened his tie and settled into the armchair across from her. Ethan's always been reckless, but this... He trailed off, shaking his head. Did you know? Naomi's voice cracked, vulnerability seeping through. Lucas met her gaze firmly. No. If I had, I would have stopped him. Naomi looked away, bitterness tightening her throat. You're nothing like him. Lucas didn't respond, but his silence said enough. Later, Evelyn returned with pajamas and warm towels. Lucas rose from his seat. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the details. As he left the room, Naomi clutched the glass tightly. The weight of the day pressed down on her, but Lucas's quiet presence was a lifeline in the storm. Naomi emerged from the steaming bath, the oversized sweatshirt Evelyn had given her hanging loosely over her frame. The warmth of the water had done little to quiet her thoughts. As she sat on the edge of the bed, Naomi's fingers drifted to her phone, hesitating before unlocking it. The last message from Ethan flashed on the screen, glowing faintly in the dim room. Can't wait to start our life together. Her stomach twisted. A soft knock followed by Evelyn's gentle voice broke the silence. Miss Brooks, Mr. Shaw wanted me to bring you something to eat. Evelyn placed a tray on the side table, tomato soup and freshly baked bread. The comforting aroma filled the air, grounding Naomi for the first time in hours. Is he always this thoughtful? Naomi asked softly, picking at the edge of the bread. Evelyn smiled knowingly. Mr. Shaw has a bigger heart than most realize. He just prefers not to show it openly. Naomi quietly ate, realizing how hungry she actually was. Her gaze wandered around the room, eventually settling on a painting hanging above the fireplace. The deep blues and streaks of gold reminded her of something familiar yet distant. Is that a Renoir? She asked aloud. From the doorway, Lucas's voice responded, startling her. No, it's a Greer. Few people recognize it. Naomi looked up surprised. I didn't know you appreciated modern art. Lucas shrugged slightly. There's a lot people don't know about me. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Naomi set her spoon down carefully. Why didn't Ethan just talk to me, Lucas? Why let it come to this? Lucas' expression softened, and for the first time the usually impenetrable exterior cracked slightly. Ethan's always been scared of facing his mistakes. He thinks running makes them disappear. Naomi met his eyes. And you? Do you run from things too? Lucas held her gaze without hesitation. No, I face them. The quiet weight of his words lingered between them until Lucas' phone buzzed, shattering the stillness. Is that him? Naomi's heart jumped. Lucas glanced at the screen and shook his head. No, work. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring things out. Naomi nodded as Lucas left, his footsteps echoing faintly down the hallway. Alone again, she lay back against the pillows, but her mind replayed their conversation. His words felt like a lifeline anchoring her to something solid. It was strange. Lucas, of all people, was the one keeping her afloat. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the sheer curtains, painting golden lines across Naomi's pale cheeks. Her phone rested loosely in her hand, still clinging to Ethan's last message. Sleep had been scarce, her mind restless with unanswered questions. A light tap at the door roused her. Evelyn entered, carrying a breakfast tray with a warm smile. Good morning, dear. Mr. Shaw asked me to bring you this. He left early for a meeting, but wanted to make sure you ate something. Naomi sat up slowly, brushing tangled hair from her face. Evelyn handed her an envelope, plain and unmarked except for Lucas's neat, careful handwriting. I canceled your museum appointments for today. Rest. I'll be back this afternoon if you need anything. Naomi's fingers lingered over the note. He's always like this, isn't he? She mused. Evelyn's eyes softened. Yes, I've worked for the Shaw family for over 15 years. Lucas has always taken care of others, even when he was young. It's just his way. Naomi sipped her coffee thoughtfully. And Ethan? Evelyn's expression grew wistful. Ethan was the charmer, the one everyone gravitated toward. Lucas was the steady one, the protector. Their parents' accident changed everything. Lucas stepped in to hold the family together. Naomi frowned. She had known Ethan for years, yet she realized now how little she knew about that part of his life. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Clara. She's been calling all morning, Evelyn observed. Naomi sighed and answered, though her heart wasn't fully in it. Clara's voice spilled over with questions and sympathy, but Naomi barely heard her. After breakfast, she slipped into a simple blouse and tailored pants left by Evelyn. They fit perfectly, as if chosen with quiet precision. The rest of the morning passed in peaceful exploration. Naomi wandered through the mansion, appreciating its beauty, now bathed in daylight. Lucas's taste surprised her. Modern art lined the walls, contrasting with the home's grand architecture. In the library, her eyes fell on a photograph resting on one of the shelves. Two teenage boys stood side by side, Ethan flashing a wide, mischievous grin while Lucas looked more reserved, his expression calm but protective. "That was taken the summer Lucas won his first chess competition," Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "Ethan had just become student council president." Naomi smiled faintly. "They look happy." "They were, for a time," Evelyn replied softly, "before the accident." Naomi placed the photo back carefully, a knot tightening in her chest. She wondered how many signs she had missed over the years, things Lucas must have silently carried. The sound of the front door opening pulled her attention. Moments later, Lucas appeared in the doorway, his tie slightly loosened after his meeting. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Naomi replied honestly. "Thank you for handling the museum." Lucas waved off the gratitude. "It was nothing." Naomi studied him for a moment as he sorted through a stack of papers. He carried himself with quiet confidence, but she noticed faint traces of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "You've always been the responsible one," Naomi said quietly. Lucas glanced up, a small smile tugging at his lips. Someone had to be. Naomi lingered in the library, her fingers gently brushing against the edges of an old photo on the shelf. Two teenage boys stared back at her, Ethan with his broad grin, all charm and confidence, and Lucas standing just a step behind, his smile faint but steady. Even then, Lucas seemed like the kind of person who carried more responsibility than he let on. "That was taken the summer Luke in his first chess competition," Evelyn's soft voice floated from the doorway. Naomi turned to see her standing there, a nostalgic warmth in her eyes. "And Ethan?" Naomi asked, unable to tear her gaze from the photo. "Student council president," Evelyn replied with a small smile. They were happy then, but after their parents' accident, everything shifted. Lucas took over the company, and Ethan. He's been looking after his brother ever since. Naomi lowered the frame, her heart sinking. Ethan rarely spoke about his family's tragedy, and now she realized how much of their shared life had been left in shadows. Her thoughts scattered as the sound of the front door opening echoed through the hall. Moments later, Lucas stepped inside, still in his tailored suit, a folder of papers in his hand. His presence immediately grounded the space. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Naomi offered a small nod. "Better. Thank you for canceling the museum appointments. I wasn't ready to face everyone." Lucas took a seat across from her, spreading the papers neatly over the coffee table. "It wasn't a problem. I know the director there. We'll need to go through a few things, though." As he spoke, Naomi watched him. How focused and methodical he was. Every movement was precise, so unlike Ethan's restless energy. "The apartment lease is the first thing," Lucas began, flipping through the pages. "Ethan signed as your guarantor, but I can take over if you'd like to keep the place." Naomi shook her head almost instantly. "No, I can't stay there. It holds too many memories." Lucas' eyes flickered with understanding. "I'll handle the lease cancellation. I'll also contact the wedding vendors to take care of the rest." Naomi swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas, why are you doing all this for me?" His hand stilled over the documents. After a moment, he looked up, meeting her gaze fully. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because no one should have to go through this alone." Naomi felt her throat tighten at the sincerity behind his words. For the first time, she saw something beneath his composed exterior: kindness, vulnerability. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed loudly on the table, shattering the stillness. Naomi glanced at the screen. "Clara." "I guess I can't avoid the world forever," Naomi sighed, reluctantly answering the call. Lucas stood, slipping his papers back into the folder. "You don't have to face it alone," he said quietly before stepping out of the room. That afternoon, Naomi stood by the window, watching as Clara's car pulled up the long drive. When her best friend stepped out, her expression was unusually serious. As soon as Clara entered the library, she pulled Naomi into a tight hug. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" Clara scolded gently, concern written all over her face. Naomi pulled back with a tired smile. "I didn't know what to say." Across the room, Lucas closed his laptop and stood. I'll give you two some privacy. Lucas, Naomi called after him, her voice soft. Thank you. For everything. He nodded slightly before disappearing down the hallway. Once alone, Clara sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. Naomi, you're not going to believe this. Naomi's heart clenched. What? Clara hesitated, glancing down as if unsure whether to continue. Ethan was seen boarding a flight to Las Vegas last night. Naomi froze. Las Vegas? Clara nodded reluctantly. With Isa Martin. Naomi's stomach twisted painfully at the name. Isa was the ambitious young intern Ethan had hired 6 months ago. He'd often praised her work, mentioning how refreshing her ideas were. You knew. Naomi's voice trembled. Clara bit her lip. I suspected, but I didn't want to upset you if I was wrong. Naomi stepped away, her eyes drifting toward the garden outside. The worst part, she whispered. I think I always knew too. I just didn't want to see it. Footsteps in the hall signaled Lucas' return. This time he was dressed casually, jeans and a dark sweater. Sorry to interrupt, Lucas said. The lawyers sent over the final apartment documents. I just need your signature. Naomi eagerly reached for the pen, grateful for the distraction. Clara, however, wasn't finished. Lucas, she asked, her tone cautious. Did you know about Isa Martin? Lucas's jaw tightened slightly. I found out this morning. She's no longer employed. Naomi glanced up sharply. You didn't have to fire her. Lucas met her eyes, unwavering. Yes, I did. There's no room for that kind of dishonesty here. Naomi watched him closely, realizing for the first time how far Lucas was willing to go to protect her. As Clara left, Lucas lingered in the library. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the walls. Naomi looked over at him, her voice soft. Lucas, why did you fire her? Was it for the company? Or for me? Lucas's gaze lingered on hers, quiet but intense. Some things, he replied, his voice lower than before, are simply unacceptable. Naomi leaned back into the plush armchair of Lucas's library, her eyes following his hands as he quietly organized papers. The room had settled into a peaceful calm, interrupted only by the soft ticking of the clock. How do you handle it all? Naomi asked after a while. The business, Ethan. Life, you always seem so in control. Lucas let out a rare chuckle, his head tilting slightly as if surprised by the question. I'm not as in control as you think, he admitted, his voice softer than usual. I've just learned to make it look that way. Naomi studied him carefully, noticing the faint creases around his eyes, the kind that didn't come from age but from carrying too much. Sometimes, Lucas continued, it's about doing what has to be done, even when it's hard. For the first time in days, Naomi felt her heart settle. His quiet strength was like an anchor pulling her back from the storm she had been drifting through. It's so obvious now, Naomi said with a small smile, surprising even herself. Before Lucas could respond, Evelyn appeared at the balcony door with a tray of fresh coffee and a stack of papers. The realtor sent over apartment listings for Miss Brooks, Evelyn said, placing the photos down. Thank you, Naomi replied, rising to her feet. I think I'm ready for something new. As Lucas made calls, Naomi carefully sifted through the photos. Each apartment felt like the first page of a fresh chapter. This one, Lucas said, pointing to a photo. His voice held a rare note of certainty. It's in Kings Row, just a few blocks from here. It even has a small room that could be a home office. Naomi's eyes lingered on the picture. A quaint apartment with large windows, hardwood floors, and a small balcony overlooking the river. How did you know I wanted a home office? She asked, her tone light but curious. Lucas looked up briefly. You mentioned it once at dinner. You said you dreamed of restoring art from home. Ethan laughed it off. Naomi's heart warmed unexpectedly. Lucas had remembered something she hadn't thought twice about, something even Ethan brushed aside. Can we see it today? She asked, hope flickering in her voice. Lucas smiled faintly. I already set up a viewing for 3 o'clock. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet hum of messages and calls. Naomi finally gathered the courage to reply to Clara's texts and answer well-meaning messages from friends and family. Most were concerned, but others were already gossiping about the canceled wedding. During lunch, Naomi found herself watching Lucas from across the garden table. His focus rarely shifted from the screen of his laptop, his fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys. You know, Naomi began, I don't think I ever really knew you. Lucas glanced up, intrigued. What do you mean? You were always Ethan's serious older brother. You came to family dinners, but it felt like you were there out of obligation. But now, I see there's more to you. Lucas closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Maybe I never let anyone know me before. Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed loudly. Her mother's name flashed on the screen for the third time that day. I have to take this, Naomi said with a sigh. Lucas nodded. I'll be in the library when you're done. We leave in an hour. The conversation with her mother played out exactly as Naomi expected. Long-winded concern and more than a little frustration about Ethan's disappearance. By the time Naomi hung up, she felt drained. She wandered back to the library, finding Lucas once again engrossed in paperwork. Tough call? Lucas asked without looking up. Mothers, Naomi replied with a tired smile. They know how to remind you of every insecurity you've ever had. Lucas's gaze softened. I wonder sometimes what my mom would have said if she were still here. Naomi sat near him, resting her arms on the edge of the desk. What do you think she would have said? Lucas thought for a long moment before answering. That the people who hurt us can still teach valuable lessons, and that hiding behind walls doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you alone. His words settled over Naomi like a blanket. It's time, Lucas said, glancing at his watch. Ready to see your possible new home? Naomi nodded, and together they left for King's Row. The apartment was even more charming in person. Sunlight streamed in through the large windows, and the faint sound of the river echoed in the distance. Naomi wandered through the empty rooms, imagining furniture, art, and a life without Ethan's shadow looming over her. The light in this room is perfect, Naomi said, standing by a window. It would make a beautiful studio. Lucas leaned against the doorway. Can you see yourself here? Naomi nodded, feeling excitement she hadn't experienced in weeks. It's perfect for restoration work. The light lets me see the details. Miss Brooks, the realtor called from the living room. There's interest from other buyers. If you want this, we'll need to move forward today. Naomi turned to Lucas, searching for reassurance. He gave a slight nod. I'll take it, Naomi said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. As Lucas handled the paperwork, Naomi strolled through the apartment one last time. The quiet space felt like the beginning of something new, something entirely hers. Her phone vibrated again. This time the message read, "We need to talk. It's important." It was from Clara. Naomi sat quietly in Lucas's library, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone when the message came. It was from Clara. "We need to talk. It's about Ethan." Naomi's stomach twisted into knots. She turned the phone toward Lucas, who frowned as he read the text. "Do you want to meet her now?" he asked. Naomi exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "I think I have to. The longer I avoid it, the harder it gets." 20 minutes later, Naomi and Lucas stepped into Oak and Sage Cafe, where Clara was already seated, nervously stirring her tea. Naomi slid into the chair across from her, bracing herself for whatever was coming. "I just found out this morning," Clara began, her voice low. "I came straight here to tell you." "Just say it," Naomi urged, though her voice trembled. Clara swallowed hard. "Ethan's been stealing from the company." Naomi's heart dropped. "What?" "He's been funneling money through fake accounts and projects," Clara explained. "The finance team uncovered it this morning." Lucas sat up straighter, his expression darkening. "How much?" "Almost $500,000, Clara admitted, avoiding Naomi's eyes. "And some of it, he used to buy a house in Las Vegas, in Isa Martin's name." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. It felt like the world had tilted beneath her. Lucas's hand instinctively found her arm, steadying her. "That's why he wanted to rush the wedding," Naomi whispered, barely able to form the words. "If we signed a prenup, I'd be tied to him, legally." Clara nodded solemnly. "If you had married him, you could have been held responsible for his crimes." Lucas swore under his breath, his grip on Naomi's arm tightening. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice colder than Naomi had ever heard. Naomi's eyes welled with tears. "How could I have missed this?" she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Lucas turned to her gently. "You weren't blind. Ethan knew exactly how to manipulate you." Clara stood, gathering her things. "I need to get back to the office. The auditors might want to speak to you tomorrow, Lucas." After she left, Naomi and Lucas remained seated in silence. The weight of the revelation hung between them like a storm cloud. "You know what's strange?" Naomi finally said. Part of me feels relieved. At least now I know it wasn't my fault. Lucas looked at her, his gaze soft but firm. It was never your fault, Naomi. Ethan is the only one to blame. Naomi hesitated, searching his face. How do you keep forgiving him? Lucas sighed deeply. I've had a lot of practice, but this time he didn't just hurt himself. He hurt you. The quiet conviction in his voice made Naomi feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in months. She met his eyes, her chest tightening unexpectedly. Lucas. Naomi started, but his phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. The lawyers, Lucas said with a glance at the screen. I need to take this. Through the cafe window, Naomi watched Lucas step outside to answer the call. It felt strange how much her feelings for him had shifted. Only days ago he had been nothing more than Ethan's brother. Distant, aloof. Now he felt like the one constant in the chaos. When Lucas returned, his face was more serious than before. We need to leave, he said. I have to handle something at the office. Naomi nodded. I need to get back to the museum anyway. I can't hide forever. As they walked toward the car, Lucas suddenly stopped, turning to face her. Naomi, he said, his voice softer now. Whatever happens with Ethan, you're not alone in this. Tears filled Naomi's eyes, but this time they weren't from heartbreak. Thank you, she whispered. The scandal erupted quickly. News of Ethan's fraud spread across Charleston, and Naomi watched from her office window as reporters gathered outside the Charleston Museum of Fine Arts. They've been here since this morning, Clara said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. Naomi opened her phone to find a live video of Lucas at a press conference. Shaw Industries does not tolerate fraud or dishonesty, Lucas said firmly to the sea of reporters. We are cooperating fully with the authorities. Naomi noticed he never said Ethan's name. He didn't have to, Clara commented, reading Naomi's thoughts. Everyone knows. Naomi's phone buzzed again. A message from Lucas. I'm coming to the museum. We need to talk. Lucas is on his way, Naomi told Clara, a new sense of anxiety tightening in her chest. Do you want me to stay? Clara offered. No, I need to hear it alone. 15 minutes later, Lucas arrived. His usually impeccable suit looked slightly rumpled, and there was a rare wrinkle in his jacket. How are you holding up? He asked, taking the seat across from her. Naomi gave a weary smile. Still trying to make sense of it all. Every new detail feels unreal. Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. There's more, Naomi. Her heart pounded. What could be worse than the money? Lucas hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Ethan has been planning this for over a year. We found emails between him and Isa. They've known each other that long. Naomi's entire body tensed. A year? But we were already engaged. Lucas's eyes softened with sympathy. The wedding was part of the plan to cover his tracks. Naomi stood, walking toward the window. Outside, reporters still hovered like vultures. Why are you telling me all of this? She asked quietly. Lucas stepped closer. Because you deserve the truth. And because I don't want there to be secrets between us. Naomi turned, her heart racing. Lucas held her gaze steadily, and for the first time in weeks, the weight she carried felt just a little lighter. Naomi's grip on her coffee cup tightened as she stared at Lucas across the quiet office. His words lingered between them. I don't want there to be secrets between us. Between us? Naomi echoed, surprised by the weight behind the phrase. Lucas hesitated, his gaze steady but uncertain. These past few days, seeing how you've handled everything, A sharp knock on the door cut him off. Clara burst in, her face pale. Ethan's here, with Isa. Naomi's heart dropped. Lucas's eyes narrowed. He has no right to be here. He's demanding to talk to you both, Clara explained, wringing her hands. He said if you refuse, he'll make a scene. Naomi's pulse quickened. She glanced at Lucas, finding the same resolve in his eyes that had been building within her. Let's deal with this, Naomi said, her voice firm. The walk to the front reception area felt heavier than it should have. Lucas stayed close, his presence grounding her as they approached the lobby. When Naomi laid eyes on Ethan, she barely recognized him. He looked thinner, exhausted, like a man unraveling. Isa stood at his side, her bright red dress painfully out of place against the tense atmosphere. Naomi, Lucas, Ethan started, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We need to talk. Lucas's voice was cold. There's nothing to say. Speak to the lawyers. Please, Ethan pressed, his gaze shifting desperately between them. We can fix this as a family. Naomi laughed bitterly, the sound sharp in the room. You destroyed our family the moment you turned my life into a lie. It wasn't like that, Ethan insisted, stepping forward. I was going to tell you. When? Lucas cut in, his voice darkening. After you dragged her into your mess and ruined her name in the process? Isa spoke up, her voice soft but deliberate. We didn't plan to hurt anyone. Naomi's anger sparked. You planned every step, Isa. Every fake deal, every stolen dollar. Naomi, please, Ethan pleaded, taking another step closer. We can make this right. Lucas stepped between them. Not this time, Ethan. It's over. The charges have been filed. Get yourself a lawyer. Ethan's desperation twisted into something darker. His face hardened as he took another step forward, but Naomi moved first, planting herself directly between him and Lucas. Get out, she said, her voice trembling but strong. Before I call security. For a moment, Ethan looked like he might argue, but something in her eyes and Lucas's unwavering stance made him hesitate. He took Isa's hand, mumbling, I'm sorry, under his breath as they left. Naomi's legs buckled the moment the door closed behind them. She sank onto the nearby bench, her hands trembling. Lucas sat beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. You were incredible, he said gently. Naomi smiled weakly. We were incredible. She turned to him, her voice softer now. Thank you for standing by me. Lucas met her gaze, his expression softening. I always will. Outside, the flash of a photographer's camera caught Naomi's eye. She didn't care. For the first time in weeks, she felt free. The next morning, rain tapped softly against Naomi's window. Her new apartment was half filled with boxes, the remnants of her old life scattered around the room. Her phone buzzed, another headline about the Shaw family scandal. This time, it wasn't just about Ethan. Reporters had started writing about Naomi and Lucas, painting him as her silent protector. A knock at the door pulled her from the screen. Evelyn stood there holding a wicker basket filled with breakfast. From Lucas, Evelyn said with a kind smile. He's sorry he couldn't come himself. Early meeting. Naomi's chest tightened. Even in the chaos, Lucas thought of her. How is he? Naomi asked, taking the basket. Evelyn hesitated, folding her hands. In all the years I've worked for the Shaw family, I've never seen him like this. It's not just business for him, Naomi. It's personal. He feels like he's failed to protect everyone. Naomi swallowed the lump forming in her throat. He hasn't failed, she said quietly. He's the only one who hasn't let me down. Evelyn's knowing smile made Naomi blush. Sometimes, Evelyn added, losing what we thought we wanted helps us find what we really need. Before Naomi could respond, her phone rang. Naomi, turn on the TV. Clara's voice sounded urgent on the other end. Naomi fumbled for the remote, flipping to the news. Ethan's face filled the screen. He was seated next to Isa, his expression carefully practiced. The pressure of living in my brother's shadow, it made me do things I regret, Ethan said, his voice thick with false remorse. Naomi's fists clenched. He's trying to spin the story. Her phone buzzed again. Lucas. Are you seeing this? She asked, answering quickly. Yes, he replied, his tone calm but distant. I'm on my way to you. Don't say anything publicly. He's trying to shift the focus. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires pierced through the line, followed by shouts and twisting metal. Lucas? Naomi's voice cracked, panic setting in. The call disconnected. Naomi frantically redialed, but it went straight to voicemail. Clara arrived minutes later, finding Naomi pale and trembling. What happened? Clara asked, alarmed. Naomi's voice shook. Lucas, he was in an accident. After what felt like hours, Evelyn finally called. He's at Charleston General. It's not serious, Evelyn reassured her. He's asking for you. Naomi rushed to the hospital. Lucas lay on the hospital bed, bandages on his arm and a cut along his cheek. When he saw her, he tried to smile. You should see the other car. Naomi didn't laugh. Tears welled in her eyes. It's not funny. Lucas reached for her hand, his grip warm despite the bandages. But I didn't die, he said softly. And maybe that's what I needed to realize a few things. Naomi sat by Lucas's bedside, her hand gently wrapped around his as the room quieted. His words lingered in the air, hanging between them like a fragile thread. Sometimes you almost have to lose everything to see what really matters, Lucas said softly, his eyes locked on hers. In that moment, everything else, the chaos, the headlines, the past, faded away. Naomi tightened her grip on his hand. Something in that touch felt grounding, like she was anchoring herself to something real. I saw Ethan's interview, she whispered. Lucas frowned. Ethan always saw what he wanted to see. But maybe this time, he realized something before we did. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions, feelings that had grown steadily stronger during the storm they had weathered together. Naomi opened her mouth to speak, but the doctor entered the room. "Mr. Shaw," the doctor said, flipping through his chart, "we'll need to run a few more tests." Naomi gently let go of Lucas's hand, stepping back with a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be back soon," she promised. Lucas's gaze followed her to the door. "I'll be waiting," he replied with a soft smile that made Naomi's heart skip. The week following Lucas's accident felt like a blur. Naomi visited him every day, juggling work at the museum while fending off reporters still circling the Shaw Industries scandal. One afternoon, Naomi arrived at the hospital, a stack of papers tucked under her arm. Sunlight poured through the large glass windows, casting golden patterns across the hallway floor. Evelyn met her just outside Lucas's room, shaking her head with a knowing smile. "He's cranky today," Evelyn warned. "The doctors want him to stay a few more days. You know how much he hates not being in charge." Naomi chuckled. "I brought something that might distract him." She pulled a small painting from her bag, its colors soft and warm. Inside the room, Lucas sat propped up against the pillows, his laptop balanced on his lap. His arm was still wrapped in a sling, but it hadn't slowed him down much. "If you're here to tell me to rest," he teased without looking up, "I've heard it all before." Naomi smiled. "No lectures today. I brought this for you." Lucas closed his laptop and accepted the painting. His expression softened as he traced the canvas with his fingertips. "I remember this," he said. "It's the same style as the one in the guest room." "I thought you could use something familiar," Naomi replied. Their moment was interrupted by Naomi's phone buzzing loudly on the bedside table. Clara's name flashed across the screen. "Put it on speaker," Lucas suggested, leaning back against the pillows. "Naomi, you're not going to believe this," Clara's voice crackled through the phone. "Ethan's giving another interview. He's claiming you and Lucas were involved before the wedding." Naomi's heart dropped. "That's not true," she snapped. "The press loves the story. They're calling it a love triangle," Clara added. Naomi ended the call, tossing the phone onto the table with a frustrated sigh. Lucas studied her quietly. "We need to talk about us." Naomi looked at him, startled. "Now?" "Yes," Lucas said firmly, "because Ethan might be lying about the past, but he's not wrong about the present." Naomi sat on the edge of his bed, her pulse quickening. "Since that day at the church," Lucas began, his voice low, "when I saw you standing there, hurt but still strong, something shifted. Or maybe it was always there, and I just didn't let myself see it." Naomi opened her mouth, but Lucas gently raised a hand to stop her. "Almost losing my life made me realize how precious time is. And the truth is, these past few days, they've been some of the best I've had in a long time." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if this is just gratitude? Or you're trying to fix things because of Ethan?" Lucas brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, his thumb softly grazing her cheek. "Do you really think that's all this is?" he asked gently. Before Naomi could answer, the doctor returned. "Mr. Shaw, your tests look good. If all goes well, you'll be discharged in 2 days." "Finally, some good news," Lucas said, relieved. The doctor nodded but added, "You'll need someone to help with your recovery, especially with your arm." Naomi straightened. "I can do that." Lucas looked at her, raising a brow. "You don't have to." "I know," Naomi replied softly. "But I want to. Maybe this is what we need, a little time to figure out what's real." Lucas's eyes softened. "You know," he said with a smirk, "I've spent years fixing other people's messes. Maybe this time I get to focus on something that's just for me." Naomi smiled and squeezed his hand. "Then let's take our time. No rushing, no pressure, just us." The sun began to set outside, drenching the room in warm hues of gold. In that quiet moment, they both knew it felt like a beginning. 3 months later, autumn arrived in Charleston, turning the trees outside Lucas's estate into fiery shades of orange and red. A crisp breeze filtered through the open balcony doors as Naomi worked in the library, cataloging artwork Lucas was donating to the museum. "I thought I'd find you here," Lucas said from the doorway, his arm finally free from the bandages. Naomi turned and smiled. "How's the patient?" A little more stubborn, but otherwise fine. Lucas replied with a grin. Naomi held up one of the paintings. Are you sure you want to part with these? Some of them are worth a fortune. Lucas stepped beside her, gazing at the painting. Art isn't meant to be hidden away. It should be shared. Naomi glanced up at him, her heart light. Funny, that's kind of how I feel about you now. Lucas chuckled, reaching to brush a leaf from her shoulder. Maybe, he said softly. Sometimes the best things find us when we stop trying to plan every detail. Naomi traced the edge of the painting with her fingers, the vibrant colors almost glowing beneath the sunlight streaming through the library window. These paintings are incredible, she murmured, tilting her head as she admired them. Are you sure you want to part with all of them? Lucas stepped beside her, his gaze soft as he studied the piece she was working on. Art should be shared, not hidden away, Lucas replied. His tone suggested he wasn't just talking about paintings, and Naomi noticed. For weeks now, she had been by his side, helping him recover, organizing the estate, and in between they'd built something fragile but real. It was as if the unspoken words between them had painted their own quiet masterpiece. Lucas gently broke the silence. I got a call from Clara this morning. Naomi looked up. Ethan admitted everything. He took a deal with the police. Naomi exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly. How long will he be in jail? She asked softly. 3 years. Maybe less if he behaves. Isa cooperated, so she won't serve time, but she'll carry the mark. Naomi met Lucas' eyes, sensing the weight he still carried. How do you feel about it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas finally turned to face her. I don't feel like it's my responsibility anymore. And maybe that means I've grown too. Naomi smiled, recognizing how far he'd come since that day in the church. When she first met Lucas, he had seemed untouchable, focused solely on work and keeping the family's reputation intact. Now she saw the layers beneath the surface. Evelyn told me you're thinking about moving, Naomi said, her tone light but curious. Lucas nodded. This house holds too many memories, some good, some not. I think it's time for something new. Naomi packed one of the paintings carefully, sliding it into a box. Funny how life works, she mused. A few months ago, I thought I was heading for my perfect ending. But now, Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentle. Now? Naomi smiled softly. Now I realized that ending wouldn't have made me happy. I was chasing the wrong story. Lucas held her gaze for a long moment, the air between them shifting. Before he could say anything, Evelyn entered with a stack of mail. A letter for you, Naomi, she said, handing over a heavy envelope. Naomi opened it, her eyes scanning the paper. Slowly, a wide smile spread across her face. I got the promotion, she said, almost laughing. Director of Restoration. Lucas's face lit up with genuine happiness. That's incredible. You deserve it. Naomi laughed softly, shaking her head. When Ethan left me at the altar, I thought everything had fallen apart. But maybe that was just the beginning. Lucas stepped closer again, his voice steady but warm. Naomi, he began carefully, I think we've waited long enough. Naomi's breath caught. Waited for what? Lucas smiled, his hand brushing gently against hers. For this. He leaned in, and when his lips met hers, it was soft, unhurried, like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place. The kiss held everything they hadn't said but had felt for so long. When they pulled apart, Naomi could see something in Lucas's eyes she hadn't seen before. Love, quiet and certain, the kind she had hoped for, but never truly believed she'd find. You know, she said with a teasing smile, for someone who likes to plan everything, this was very unexpected. Lucas laughed, the sound rich and light. Maybe you've taught me that not everything needs to be planned. From the doorway, Evelyn chuckled softly. The truck for the paintings is here, she announced, giving them both a knowing look. Thank you, Evelyn, Lucas said, but his eyes stayed on Naomi. They stepped onto the wide porch, watching as the museum staff carefully loaded the paintings into the truck. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of dried leaves, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, painting shadows along the driveway. Naomi slipped her hand into Lucas, savoring the moment. So, she said, what happens now? Lucas squeezed her hand gently. Now we write our own story. No rules, no pressure, just us. Naomi smiled, leaning into him. I like that. Although I'll admit, this isn't the story I thought I'd be living a few months ago. Lucas looked down at her, his voice soft. The best stories are never the ones we plan. They're the ones that surprise us, make us grow, and show us who we really are. Naomi rested her head against his shoulder as the last painting disappeared into the truck. Each canvas had been part of the estate's history, but now they represented something else, a new beginning. "You know," Naomi said quietly, "the first painting I saw in this house changed how I saw you." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She smiled, tracing the memory in her mind. "It made me realize there was so much more to you than I thought. You're like a painting with layers, full of surprises." Lucas pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "And you," he whispered, "were the first person who cared enough to look past the surface." As the sun dipped lower, casting its final glow over the porch, Naomi and Lucas stood together. Two people who had found something unexpected but deeply right. Sometimes love doesn't come in the form we expect, but in the quiet moments, with the most surprising person, at just the right time. As the final painting disappeared into the back of the truck, Naomi leaned into Lucas, the crisp autumn air wrapping around them like a soft blanket. The golden leaves rustled at their feet, swirling with the breeze, as if dancing to celebrate their fresh start. For the first time in months, Naomi felt at peace. She glanced up at Lucas, who stood quietly beside her, his fingers intertwined with hers. His eyes softened as he looked down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes," Lucas said softly, "the best endings aren't endings at all. They're just the start of something better." Naomi smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, "but I'm glad everything happened the way it did. If Ethan hadn't left, I might have missed out on what I was really meant to find." Lucas pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Funny how life works, isn't it?" The two of them stood there for a long while, watching as the truck disappeared down the road. The sun dipped below the horizon, washing the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. "So," Naomi said with a playful smile, "what happens next?" Lucas chuckled, pulling her a little closer. "Now," he replied, his voice warm, "now we write our own story. No more expectations, no more rushing, just us." Naomi grinned. "I think I like that plan." As the last light faded, they stepped inside together, the front door closing behind them, marking not the end of their story, but the beginning of something far greater than either of them had imagined. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more heartwarming tales, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Stay tuned for more stories about love, resilience, and new beginnings. See you in the next one.